Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, the podcast with Dr. Susan Crockett. You are listening to episode number 25, Connection, an interview with fellow certified life coach, Stephanie Forck. Stephanie would like to dedicate this episode to her mom. Listen to what she says about her. Even through struggles and the craziness of life, she was always willing to sit down and listen. She inspires me every day to be intentional in how I show up in relationships and life.
Welcome to Becoming Virtuosa, where women learn to love their lives. Do you find yourself frustrated by society's expectations? Looking for practical advice on how to discover your talents and level up your life? You found the right place. Here's your host, U.S. News top doctor, robotic surgeon, and certified life coach, Dr. Susan Crockett.
Well, hello, my virtuosas. I'm your host, Dr. Susan Crockett. On the podcast, you can call me Sue because I'm not actually your doctor. I am a doctor, but probably not your doctor, at least not today because it's Saturday. And I'm enjoying a lovely day outside. Everybody's been asking me about COVID and if I'm still working and if I'm doing surgery and if the office is open. And the truth is I am crazy busy, which is such a blessing. It's such an amazing thing to be able to take care of people and be there for them. But I think what's happened is people waited at home with the first stay-at-home order. And they were sick and they got sicker. And so when we got testing available and opened up our ORs again, we had this backlog of people that came in and they were sicker than stink, like really sick people and busier than normal. And now we've gotten a little farther down into this whole pandemic. And now what we're seeing is still really sick people, but also people who are bored and tired of being at home and looking for any reason to come out, even go to the doctor and have surgery. So we are doing masking and social distancing and testing all of our surgery patients, and knock on wood, I've stayed healthy. And so as have my kids and my family. Such a blessing. And I hope all of you are weathering this storm too. One reason I wanted to talk about COVID today, it kind of dates the podcast, but I think it's important because today we're talking about connection and relationship. We're talking about that with one of our Virtuosa coaches, Stephanie Forck, who is a teacher and mother of three. And she had this idea a long time ago for doing this podcast, but the timing of it is perfect because I think in this time of corona pandemic, a lot of people are feeling very disconnected. And I think you're really going to appreciate the take that she has on it and I'll give you some good ideas about your feeling of connectivity in this world and with others. So Stephanie is going to teach about connection today. She, in her coaching practice, she centers on helping women overcome stress and burnout and feelings of overwhelm. So she's amazing. She provides tools and simplified strategies which help women flourish in their motherhood and live their lives with joy and confidence. So I'd like for you to join me in welcoming today Stephanie Forck. Hey, Steph, how are you? Hey, can I call you
Good.
Steph?
Yes, you can call me Steph.
All right. Well, I'm so glad that you're here with us today. I hear you're going to talk with us about connection, and I'm so excited for our listeners to hear this. This is something that I get questions about all the time, relationship and connection. And so welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Today, let's start by, I'm interested in your story. So tell us about your story about how you came to be a life coach and why connection and relationship are your thing. How did this get to be your jam?
All right. Well, I came to life coaching when my family and I we were living in Japan, and my
Wow.
son was having some trouble in school. He was in an international school. And of course, we were feeling really disconnected from family and from, the traditional American school systems that we just had always known. And he was in first grade and he started having
Ah,
trouble just socially and academically. And, like I said, I was just feeling so disconnected with what I knew just in life in general.
I
And my
bet.
sister-in-law, yeah, it was kind of a tough time. And while we loved living over there, we were having some struggles. So my sister-in-law came to visit and she had learned of the life coach school and she was getting trained. She was getting certified to be a life coach.
How
She's
cool.
a marriage therapist and decided to get certified at the life coach school. And she said, let me just coach you a little bit on this, So she started coaching me through and, just even the little bit that she was teaching me, I was able to recognize, it's really about my perspective about what's going on. My circumstances don't have to change necessarily for me to really start thinking and feeling a different
Right,
way. And she
right.
introduced me to the podcast, the Life Coach School podcast, and I couldn't stop listening to it. We were there about another year after that, and I just grew leaps and bounds. I just wanted to know everything. So when we came back to the States, I decided, okay, this stuff helped me so much. I realized, my son, the circumstances of my life don't have to necessarily change for me, like I said, to have, such a different perspective and view on things. I started feeling so much better. I wanted to get certified and share that with others. So,
Cool.
and particularly, I guess, the connection with connection and relationships that I have such a heart for is that I was able to create that feeling of connection with my son and, with my family members that were so far away. It wasn't
Wow.
a physical thing with my family members. I
Yeah.
was able to just start generating that feeling of connection through my thoughts, through my thought work
So
and
powerful.
managing
That
my
is
mind.
so powerful. So cool. All right. Well, cool. Well, I'm anxious to hear what you have to teach our listeners today. As you know, we're always working on like becoming the best versions of ourselves. And I think this topic of relationship and connectivity and the work that we do within ourselves to be connected with people in the world around us is so important. So, what have you got to teach us today? What do you know about
Yeah.
connection that I don't know?
Well, you're absolutely right. Connection is just, as human beings, it's just in our DNA to want to be connected to other
Yeah.
human beings, right? To feel
Yeah.
that feeling of connection. It's just innate desire that we have as humans. So I feel like it is such an important topic, but a lot of times we look outside for that feeling of connection. And we don't always get that because we know we can't control what other people are doing outside of us, right? And
But
things
we
that are
all wanna be
happening.
loved. We all wanna be loved so badly, right? Ah,
Right, right. So I think, first of all, I want to talk about, the definition of connection. And then I want to talk about lovability. I also want to talk about unconditional love. And then I want to talk about something that listeners can do, a little exercise they can do called the relationship circle, kind of thinking about what they're looking for in relationships.
that's awesome. Okay, so what is connectivity? What is connection?
So, connection, the definition we would use as life coaches is the feeling, connection is a feeling, the feeling that we have when we think about another human being.
Huh. I never thought about it as a feeling. I always think of connectivity or connection as, like, a thing. Like, I would have put it in the sea line as, like, something that just exists. Thinking about it as a feeling is really interesting. Okay, keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. Okay. So, connection, and that's what's so great. This connection that we're feeling with others, we know that as you've taught your listeners on the podcast, we know that our feelings come from our thoughts, right? So, what we're
Mhm.
thinking can create this feeling of connection. And that's good news because we can stir up this feeling or this emotion of connection on purpose. And we can create this
Wow.
kind of on our own, no matter what is happening outside or what other people are doing or how,
So
you know,
that's awesome. Like, that feels so powerful to hear that we have the ability to control that, but it also feels a little like we're just making it up. Like, how tell me a little bit about why that's not us just making up in our head that there's a relationship there when what's the difference between that and real connectivity?
Okay, so here's an example of, and I heard somebody else say this the other day on a podcast, and I thought this was so good. Another kind of definition outside of the definition that I just gave about connection being a feeling is plugged in, right? When you connect something, you're plugging something in. So when you combine that idea of being plugged in to this idea that connection is a feeling, the feeling that we feel when we're about a relationship. We don't even have to be relationally close, like physically close. We can be plugged in, but that it comes from our thoughts about that relationship. And I will say, I want to make sure that, the whole thing about feeling connected with other people, one of my main points here was, you have to be plugged into yourself first.
Ah,
Like
that's key.
feeling this. Yes, yes. Now we can't just, go around and make up thoughts, right? That we're going to believe. I see what you're saying about, oh, explain more. So, when you're plugged in to yourself and you are feeling connected to yourself, and this is the whole the idea of lovability that I wanted to talk about, this knowing that you're 100% lovable and you're 100% worthy, and you're plugged
Wow,
into that, to yourself, the more connected you are with that idea and that belief,
that's powerful.
then we are able to then start creating thoughts that will create the feeling of connection with ourselves first, and then we're able to overflow that with other people.
I love that. So, in one of my early podcast series, I talked about the transformation tool, which is just a process of being able to help people move from being stuck to being unstuck in their lives. And one of the principles that I talked about there was aligning yourself with your moral compass or with God or whatever you call that. So, people call that aligning with the universe, or, different spiritual faiths have different ways of describing it. But my background's Christian, so I tend to say God. It doesn't have to be called that. But that, what you're talking about kind of reminds me about that, is like, we all know that still small voice inside of us, and yet we don't always plug into that. Like, we don't always come into alignment with that voice, whether we talk about it as being God or that voice inside of us or conscious or what we know. And so when I hear you talk about being plugged in, that's what that reminds me of, is just having that inner awareness. And then from
Yes,
that, you're able to generate the thoughts about being connected with others. Am I close to what you're teaching?
absolutely. Yes, yes. I liked the plug-in idea because it was kind of a visual for me. So
Yeah.
certainly when we're able to plug into ourselves and recognize our worth and our value, we are able then to start recognizing that outside and other people. And that's where that feelings and those feelings of connection can
Yep.
grow. And I'm the same way, we are 100% lovable. We're made no matter
Oh,
no matter what other people say, no matter what we do or don't do, we are designed. And I too come from a Christian background, and I believe, God made us, our maker, whoever we believe that to be. I believe that to be God. God made us 100% worthy, 100% lovable.
okay. I think this is worth sitting on for a minute, because whether our listeners are coming from a Christian background or not, I just see so many of us, so many people that don't really get that they're so hard on themselves, and they see themselves as bad or unlovable or not worthy. And I've seen that cause so much distress and destruction in people, that for us just to be able to get that message across, that our lovability is, it's 100%. You're 100% lovable. You are 100% worthy just where you are and how you are, because you are. Like,
Yes.
yes.
Right, like you said, so many people don't believe that. Maybe the way that they were raised or things that happened in their past, and there's things, so ingrained in them that
Yeah.
have been contrary, cause thoughts that are contrary to that.
Yeah.
They're, just coming back to, like you said, sitting on this for a minute and coming back to really just practicing and believing that you are 100% lovable. I heard the example the other day. It's, if your parents didn't love you when you were growing up, it was nothing to do with you. That was their capacity to
They
love,
just weren't
right?
able to. Right.
They weren't able to love you. It had nothing to do with your worth or your lovability or,
Oh,
right, your
that's so
your
powerful.
value. So coming back to that is a huge step. I mean, that's really important in doing the work of feeling connection.
I think so too. So when we're kids and in a family and growing up and becoming teenagers and adults, we don't really have an awareness that there's something different or a different type of relationship in the family until we get exposed to that outside of our own family. And so I think that so many people that come from families where maybe their parents weren't able to love them, they internalize that lack of lovability as being in themselves. So what you're saying about that being like it's not your fault. You are not unlovable because your parents didn't know how to love you. That coming to that adult place where you can look at it a little bit separated and understand that is so incredibly powerful because we all do our best as parents, or we all think we try to do our best as parents, but you know there are so many different scenarios where parents come up short. And what I see in my patients is in later life, unless they can look at that and disconnect them being the cause of that, like unless like you are teaching, unless they can come to understand that they are fully lovable and it wasn't their fault that their parents didn't have the skills to be able to do that or the ability to, or the capacity to do that, they carry that and it affects all of their relationships, their work relationships, their marriages, their kids. And it's such a powerful thing to be able to step back and see that, because then you transform from suffering into awareness, right? And when you have that awareness, you can start making a difference in your kids' lives and your family's lives and your and all your relationships.
Yes,
So
yes. That first step is just the awareness of, you know, where you are first,
yeah, yeah.
and then knowing, then you can see, okay, this is where I want to work toward going.
And what you're
Recognizing
actually
it.
working towards is that unconditional love, right?
Yes, yes, which brings me to the next point. When you do the work and you come to the realization that you are 100% worthy no matter what is happening outside of you in the past and the present, then you are able to unconditionally love people. Because just like you're
Yeah.
100% worthy, others have the same
Are too,
quality, right?
right?
And no matter what they do, when we find that when we're plugged into our worthiness, our own selves, and have
Yep.
that relationship with ourselves, that healthy relationship, we're able to love others no matter what their actions are
Unconditionally.
as well, unconditionally. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I never thought of unconditional love in that way, but it kind of makes sense, like going back to the family thing. If you had a family where you didn't feel fully loved, and then there's that sense of conditional love, like love is based on what you do or who you are, and then out of that comes the lack of lovability. But once you understand that you're fully lovable and others are too, then you're able to actually do that process of unconditional love. You're actually able to exude that with others. And the whole key to that, oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. I've never
It's awesome stuff.
I've never thought of unconditional love, like how to do it or what it is in quite these terms. It's really, it's awesome. Okay, keep going. What else?
Yeah. And being able to show that unconditional love is for you, right? You want to show it to others, of course, but ultimately, you are choosing to love others no matter what they do because it's something that you want to do and it makes you feel a certain way, right? And again, this could be one of those things. It's like, well, you don't know what so and so did. I can't love them for that, right? But I heard
Yeah.
somebody say the other day, sometimes even just being able to find a connection when you maybe are disagreeing with something someone's saying or doing, even just finding the simplest connection there, like saying, okay, they have an opinion just like me, and I'm going to love them anyway,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
they think they're right about this just like me. You're able to you're able to find that, even that basic connection, and create that unconditional love. And I love them anyway. I'm going to choose to love them right now instead of
That
feel
is
anger, or, because you're just suffering from that then.
right.
Whereas when you're able to really, really know that you're loving someone unconditionally, then it's for you ultimately. And then it just, then you're passing it on to the other person, and they get
Then
to
it
do with that
flows.
what they want, right?
Right.
They're not going to
Right.
feel our feelings. They're going to feel
Yeah.
their feelings, have their thoughts and feelings about it. But we know that if that's something that you're choosing to try to live in, a space to try to be in and feel that unconditional love, sometimes it helps me to be like, okay, I can find some sort of a connection here with this person, and I can love them no matter what, or we can agree to disagree. And again, that's
Yeah.
all coming from your thoughts, right? And then it's
Yeah.
creating that unconditional love, the feeling of unconditional
So
love.
so cool. So often I think of relationships in terms of like a give and take or a back and forth or as a two-way thing. How does this how does this fit into that idea?
Okay, so first and foremost, like I said, your relationships exist because of the thoughts we have about our relationships, right? Ultimately, and I know that is sometimes when I was learning that was kind of a hard thing to wrap my mind around, but knowing that we don't need to try to control people or change people or even change ourselves so that other people like us, right? In our relationships, knowing that
Oh,
our
wow.
relationships exist. So I was just listening to a podcast the other day about that same thing. And really, our relationships, we know they're in our about our thoughts, right? It's really, a relationship is about the thoughts we have about that relationship. And it kind of happens in three different areas. It's what the other person thinks of us. And really,
Okay.
that's what we think they think about us, right?
Right?
What you think of them in
Okay.
relationship to the relationship, and then what you think of you in
I
relationship to the relationship. So ultimately, that's it still all goes back to our thoughts about the relationship. And there is some, like you were saying, there definitely is some give and take, but the ground, the baseline of the relationship still is all about the thoughts. And our
yeah,
thoughts are going to create feelings about that relationship, which will then have us showing up in a
right.
relationship in a certain way, right? Our actions
I
lining up.
okay, now that makes sense. Okay. So is that what the relationship circle is?
So the relationship circle has to do with that a little bit, but the relationship circle is really about recognizing what you want out of your relationships. So, you know, we call it, I've heard it called like want matches, or, your wants and needs, and just knowing the things that you want to get out of a relationship. And so often
Can you explain what a want match is real quick? Because I think that's a term that my listeners may not have heard before.
sure, sure. So a want match is finding a match. First of all, recognizing the wants and needs that you have in your relationships, right? That you're looking for in your relationships. So a want
Okay.
match would be finding someone who has the same wants, or wants to meet those desires in your life.
So
Like they have,
the desires or the wants from both parties match. That's what it means literally.
yes,
Okay.
yes,
Okay. Okay, keep going.
right.
It's good. So good.
Yeah. So the relationship circle is kind of finding those want matches, right? You're finding a match
Ah,
to finding someone who has the same wants and desires you do.
got
And
it.
so often, I think there's two things that I kind of had to do some of my own work on. So often we rely on maybe just one or two people, right? We might rely on
Right.
our spouse to meet all of these
Oh
desires
my
and wants,
gosh.
and they're
And who
they're
can
not
do
going to
that?
be
No.
right, right. And we don't intentionally do it, but you're like, well, you're here and I want you to do this, right?
Yeah.
Well, they're
Yeah.
not going to have all of the same, you know, they're obviously not, they're not the same person. They're not going
Yeah.
to have all the same wants and desires that you want. And then the next thing is even just taking a minute to, I mean, how often do we really sit down and think about the wants and
Right.
where we're getting the wants and desires that we have in our life and where
Right.
we're getting these from and who, we're expecting to meet these. So I did have a little activity or
Yes.
exercise
Awesome.
if listeners would want to try it. It's just basically, it's just kind of three questions to sit down and ask yourself
Okay.
to help you find your relationship circle and to find your want matches. So the first thing, like I said, is to just sit down and write your wants and needs. Just write
Okay.
a list of those.
Okay.
Include everything that you want to have in your life in terms of connection, companionship, love. Some of the ones I did this the other day, and I want a friend who's a mother. Well, of course, my spouse can't. It can't be that for me. And a physical connection and cuddling, a traveling companion, someone to laugh hard with. I mean, those were some things that were really important in my life that I had written down. So just taking a minute to write some of those down, be as specific as you
Okay.
can with that. And then the second question is, or the second step is to go through that list and see where you already have that want match with your current relationships.
Okay.
See who, fill in who do I already have a want match with some of these. Might be through,
Okay.
friends, mentors, spouses, wherever you're looking for those. And then, if there are things that aren't being met, then that's maybe some work that you want to do. You want to go out and find those or, work on looking for other people to meet those. But
Yeah.
the third step of this is write a little bit in detail about the relationship that you want to have with yourself.
Oh,
Because
wow.
once seeing some of those needs that aren't being met, I think one of the most important things then is working on, okay, why asking, why do I want these? And is this, something that's really important to me? And then working on the relationship that you want to have with yourself and kind of getting that down on paper. What thoughts do you want to think about yourself?
Right. Oh my
What
gosh.
feelings do you want to feel?
Because no matter where we go, we're still with us. Can't get away from ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves, then oh my gosh, we're in such big trouble. And yet so many people don't really take the time to sit down and think about what that means and to love themselves. And, yeah, so good. Cool. Okay. So the three
Yeah.
steps are write down your wants and needs. Let me see if I got this right.
Mhm.
See where you already have a match in people in your
Mhm.
life. And then the third step is write about your relationship with yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that kind of brings it full circle. I guess that's why, it's labeled the relationship circle. It's just kind of bringing it full circle. So we're looking outside for people that are a want match. But when some of
Uh,
those needs aren't met, then we can definitely look inside ourselves and think about the relationship with ourselves because that's
so
really what
great.
relationships
So
are, what we want to think of ourselves.
that's really close to summarizing all of this up, right? If you wanted to leave our listeners with one last thought or the main nugget that you want them to take home from this and to take forward into the next week, what would you say that is?
Yeah, I would say just really the main takeaway of this that I want to drive home to listeners is just that connection is really an inside job. It starts inside. When
Yeah.
we are feeling connected with ourselves and we're recognizing our worth and our that we're 100% worthy no matter what, then we're able to create those feelings of connection and use that in relationships with others as well. When we're
So
feeling
awesome.
connected to ourselves, we're more likely to find that connection outside.
It sounds so backwards, but so powerful. Thank you so much for being with us today and for
Yeah.
such a great podcast, some really good tools and deep teaching. I think this was powerful. And thanks for joining us, Stephanie. Have a great
I was
week.
so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Sue. You too.
You're welcome. All right. So what we've shown you today is hopefully a little deeper idea, a little different idea about connection and unconditional love and relationship, that even though we talk about connectivity as being in between two people and something outside of ourselves, it actually originates from within ourselves, which is a very powerful place to be from. And I'm reminded, as I was talking with Stephanie and we were doing the interview, I'm reminded about one of my favorite quotes. And a lot of people have attributed this to Nelson Mandela. It's supposedly not actually found as a quote by Nelson Mandela in any of his speeches. It's been attributed to Marianne Williamson because the last line is the last line in her book, A Course in Miracles, but she doesn't actually know where the rest of the quote came from either, so we don't really know the truth or the true author of it. But maybe that makes it even more beautiful and more interesting. So the quote is, "Our deepest fear is not that we are weak. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others." Isn't that beautiful? Just love it. So obviously what I'm reading this week is A Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles by Marianne Williamson. Amazing book. A lot of times she gets credited for writing A Course in Miracles, which she did not, but she has written some amazing books about it. So I would encourage you to check that out. And then what I'm listening to this week is one of my favorite musicians, Bob Schneider, who's a local Austin musician. I've had the privilege of seeing him in concert several times. He's just an amazing writer, and I love his lyrics. So this song is called "The World Exploded into Love." And I'm going to leave that link to my favorite YouTube video of that, which has some just spectacular photography and art on it. It's just beautiful. So I hope you'll enjoy that with me today. And then what I've been watching Call the Midwife, which is kind of weird for me because being an OBGYN, even though I don't do deliveries anymore, I did for a very, very long time, like longer than I want to admit. So it's an interesting series, kind of watching the whole baby birthing, midwife, things set in 1950s London. So it also has 9 seasons. So if you're running out of things to binge watch on Netflix and you haven't seen Call the Midwife, not only does 9 seasons mean there's lots to watch, it also means that it was good enough to make it through 9 seasons. And lots of other people love it too. So probably a good choice. So next week, we have an interruption in our interviews. I'm actually going to do a teaching podcast. I'm going to be teaching on a very important topic that I've been giving a lot of prayer and study and thought to over the last 3 months. It's called Healing All the Isms. And we'll be talking about healing all the suffering that's happening in our world today, starting with racism, but talking about all the other isms as well, and how we heal and move from suffering to awareness to healing. So I hope you'll join me next week for that very special episode. Okay, my virtuoses, let your light shine. Plug it in, plug your heart light in, light it up, connect with others through and with your heart light. Love always, Sue. And I will see you next week in episode 26.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Becoming Virtuosa. If you want to find out more, come check out virtuosacoaching.com. That's virtuosa with an A, coaching.com. See you next week.